also the important review topics. And actually, we covered DPO roles and responsibility and CIPM relevance to the DPDP Act, right? And today's session, we are gonna have some discussion about a plan to clear the exam in 30 days and some of the exam prep discussions. So for people who have joining today, a quick overview. We have three different certification variant, which is Certified Information Privacy Professional, which is focused on different data privacy laws. We have four variants there. One for the Europe, which is called as CAPPE, and one for the US, CAPP US, and then we have one for Canada, and one we have for Asia. And we focus on CIPPE, which is typically the gold standard, and we also have CIPM, which is the focus for today, and CIPT is a Certified Information Privacy Technologies, focuses on how to embed privacy in technology layer, right? So these are the three certifications, and that is provided by IAPP. And generally, if you finish two out of the three, provided you have covered CIPP as a mandate and demonstrate 3 years of experience, and you have some reference, you will be able to attain the stack, which is FIP, Fellow of Information Privacy. This is sort of highest accreditation you get in the domain of data privacy. All right. So that's, and I have all the four certification. So fortunately, you're all in good hands. So, uh, so that's the, and these certification have tremendous value in the market. I think that's the drive that has made you to also opt in for the certification to this webinar. Okay. All right. So today we are going to start with the records of processing activity. So records of processing activity, if people remember yesterday, I told you that there are three important things which you need to have in place if you're going to be audited, or if you're going to be checked by the data protection authorities or any regulators. There are three important things that you need to have in place. These are the first important requirements that you need to be ready with, right? That is your documented policy procedures, and second is your inventory or records of processing activity, and third is the assessments, and the most importantly the data protection impact assessment, right? If you have these three in place, it shows in terms of what kind of organization you are. I would say these are nothing but your visiting cards for your privacy program, correct? So this gives you in terms of what kind of maturity you have in your organization, and the authorities will have a clear view in terms of how what you do with the personal data inside your organization. All right. So and part of that, the first important topic we are discussing is the records of processing activity. So records of processing activity, or we call it as inventory of personal data, is nothing but ensuring that we document every single personal data that comes into the organization across different channels. Okay, and when we document this, there are certain important parameters we need to document along with that, right? In terms of what we collect and how which channel we are collecting this data, what is the purpose we are collecting this data, that could be the business purpose, and then what is the lawful basis to do that. There are different lawful bases across different laws. If you are operating in GDPR, you might have heard there are 6 lawful bases. If you are operating in India, you would have heard consent and other legitimate uses. Likewise, the lawful basis varies from different regulations, but it's important for you to map under which lawful basis you are processing this data, and with whom you are sharing this data, and what are the security measures in place to protect this data, right? These are sort of a very high level definition. Trust me, when I develop this records of processing activity, it goes up to sometimes 30 columns. Okay, the reason is it's not very simple for you to build this ROPA based on what is presented in the slides, right? When I say in terms of your sharing of this data, let me give you some use case. So sharing of the data can happen to either within the organization, outside the organization, sometimes even outside the territories, which is cross-border data transfer, correct? So the data can be transferred or disclosed. There is a difference between the word transfer and disclose. When you transfer the data, you're transferring either internal to your organization, or it could be transferred to any of your processes or sub-processes. Whereas a disclosure is a change of ownership, which means you need to take an additional consent, and which means you are gonna transfer it to a new third party. Often we call it as a independent controllers, right? So in many of the organization, you may have a lot of independent controllers working together for many reasons. A simple use case is when you're trying to make a payment for any services, there could be a payment gateway that could be involved, right? And there is a bank which is processing. All of these are independent controllers which are working part of any services, right? So the data is getting transferred to them, and that's how the data ownership is going to be changed, because the way they're going to operate the data is going to be entirely different. They are not under any sort of obligation from controller from where the data got transferred, right? So likewise, there is a lot of nuances in terms of how do we fill this records of processing activity. This gives the complete workflow of this entire scheme of things, right? So this is the foundation for many of the activities that we will do later. For instance, if you want to fulfill a data subject rights, right? So in this case, it is very easy if you have a proper records of processing activity to actually respond to a data subject request, because we know where all the data travels within the organization. We know the data flow, where it resides, and we know what categories of data it's involved in that case. So it helps us to quickly respond to a data subject request. Similarly, there is a data breach situation. We need to assess the impact of the breach, right? So again, you will rely back on the ROPA to understand what is the impact of the breach based on the categories, what are the current controls done, have we to whom it is shared. All these things can be quickly assessed to understand the impact of the data breach, because these are all critical decisions. You have a very sensitive time involved in that. You have 72 hours cut off to inform to the regulators if you are operating in GDPR. And similarly, this timeline could vary from different regions, right? So in that reason, you need to have a robust and a quality exercise done for preparing your inventory, right? And even data protection impact assessment also has a lot of input from your data inventory, right? So this is a very very important activity that we do, and that's what we discuss in the course. So next is the DPIA, one of my favorite topics, because there is a lot of confusion that happens in the market in terms of what is a PIA, what is a DPIA. There are too many jargons which are being used in the market. A lot of people confuse between these terminologies, and they get bogged down by actual terminologies rather than focusing on the logic of these assessments, right? There are too many assessments also out in the market. Some people use it as privacy risk assessment, or they call it as privacy impact assessment, data protection impact assessment, and we have transfer impact assessment, we have breach impact assessment, we have legitimate impact assessment, privacy audit. There are so many types of terminologies that exist. So natural for people to get confused, right? So don't worry, if you join my sessions, you will definitely get that clarity absolutely sorted. If you want me to give a very simple understanding of PIA to DPIA, I can share it right now with you. So privacy impact assessment has been a terminology that has existed long before, and DPIA is a terminology that came specific with GDPR, right? And GDPR has clearly mentioned in terms of what are the triggers for doing a DPIA, and how do you need to document, how do you take up the next steps, and how do you conclude a DPIA, right? So DPIA is a GDPR specific term, but what happened is many other laws started using DPIA term. For instance, in the Indian law, you will find the terminology of DPIA, right? So what's the takeaway here? The takeaway is, look at what assessment terminology used by the concerned law, right? If you're operating in Indian law, don't confuse yourself with PIA. Simply use DPIA. Look at what has been defined, in what circumstances you need to do a DPIA. Follow that. Don't apply your global understanding, global best practices knowledge to this. Many people make that mistake. I asked this question: when you do a PIA, DPIA, out of 10 people, 9.5 people tell the wrong answer, saying that for an entity level, I will do this. For a process level, I do this. Maybe at that level, I do this. For this, I do this. But no, look at what is defined under the law. Try to practice that. 99% of your problem is solved, right? So if you're operating in GDPR, DPIA is the assessment name. Even in European GDPR, you can follow PIA. There is nothing wrong about that. Okay, PIA, as I told you, is a term that existed for a long time. right? So anything that doesn't fall under the defined parameters of DPIA, you can use a PIA. There's nothing wrong with that. If you are doing a mergers and acquisition, right? If you are doing an entity level assessment, there's nothing wrong to use a PIA even in GDPR, right? So the point here is the law mentions under what circumstances you need to do a DPIA. You cannot change that. You have to do a DPIA. Simple, right? Similarly, as I told you, look for what has been defined under the law and try to practice that to avoid all these confusions. In a best practice, I would say PIA varies a lot based on the requirements of that particular jurisdictional law. There is no hard and fast rule in terms of when you apply, how to apply, what are the steps documented. It varies a lot, right? Whereas DPIA, I've seen it's very specific most of the times, but again, look at what is being defined in the law, right? It's something which I can give as an important takeaway for all of you to remember to tackle that question in the future. All right. What you see in the screen is the steps that is involved in GDPR. Okay. So in GDPR, we have these clear outlines in terms of what are the sequence which you need to do. Right. So irrespective of what is mentioned there, I can quickly summarize to you. The first step is always description of the processing activity, right? And this is the documented first step. And the second is understand the necessity and proportionality of the processing, and third is identify if there is any risk that is going to be there to the data subject because of this processing activity, and the fourth is identify the potential mitigation steps, and the sixth step is apply and see if you still have residual risk. You need to do a consultation with the DPI, with the supervisory authority, right? They will help you to take a decision. Either they say they will ask you to apply additional controls, or you may need to abort that particular activity. So these are some of the important events which is defined as a process steps for DPIA, and there are triggers specifically defined in GDPR. For example, if you are processing large volume of sensitive personal data, if you are going to do profiling activity, if you're going to do a large scale monitoring of personal data, all these things clearly calls out for DPIA. And I will give you the list of again extended triggers based on different guidelines. Then that will again help you to decide when and what situation you need to do a DPIA. Okay. Uh, the second important thing which I told you is the privacy policy documentation, right? So privacy policy, what you see in the screen is just a sample which I'm trying to show you. So privacy policy addresses a lot of important things. See, first again, there is again important confusion that exists. What is the difference between a privacy policy and a privacy notice, right? So the terminology naturally being confused because of the semantics vary from different regions, right? If you go to US, predominantly they call it as a policy everywhere. There is no privacy notice terminology used. Now, I see the confusion quite natural, but just to avoid this, anything that is external facing, we call it as a notice. Anything internal to the organization, we call it as a policy, right? And what we have in notice is towards how a individual's personal data is going to be used, handled, and how it's going to be protected, and in terms of what are the rights associated with the data. It's a short summary of all these important questions, right? And what's a privacy policy? A privacy policy is a very detailed document that describes us in terms of how the personal data is going to be handled by the organization, and how it's going to be again, in terms of when we say protected, it goes into a lot of depth. And then retention period, in terms of how we are going to decide the retention period, how is it classified, and roles and responsibilities. All these things covers part of your privacy policy, right? But privacy policy doesn't stop here, but you need to extend it to privacy procedures. In privacy procedures, we will have a lot of dedicated procedures set up. For example, how do you handle data subject rights? How do you handle a data breach? Correct? How do you actually maintain your records of processing activity? How do you do a data discovery? Like these are specific procedures that needs to be defined so that you have a robust framework and helps the employees to do a consistent handling of personal data within the organization, right? As I told you, this is a very important step that shows your maturity as an organization. All right. Important topic, which is again a commonly asked question, which is privacy by design, right? So privacy by design is not again a very new terminology. It's been existing for a long time. In 1992, a Canadian commissioner, Anachuakin, she came up with this philosophy or a framework, what we call it as privacy by design, right? It's very similar to if someone from an information security background, which what we call it as security by design, right? Security by design and privacy by design are almost the same logic, right? Trying to apply the required elements at a very early stage. It could be security controls or privacy controls to ensure you avoid the unnecessary repercussion, right? If I have to put in the right definition, we are embedding privacy at a very early stage to
Okay.
protect the rights and freedom of data subject. So privacy by design as a concept is a very interesting one because it was there from 1992, officially put it into a framework, and then what happened slowly is that in GDPR it got officially adopted, right? And now it becomes a mandate for the controllers. The controller have to demonstrate privacy by design. It's a topic like many people feel it's a rocket science, but it's a very simple topic. Privacy by design is if you actually integrate your privacy requirements right from your project inception stage and embed this into every stages of your personal data lifecycle, then you're sorted, right? A simple case is at the time of collection. Collection is the first step. Whenever you're actually whenever you're collecting the data, that's the first step of the entire data lifecycle, correct? So in this case, uh, when you're, let's take an example, practical example of KYC form, right? KYC form is when you actually try to know your customers. It could be done for various reasons. It could be for a product or a service, whatever it could be. In this case, are you collecting only the data that is necessary for that particular activity? This is an example of privacy by design. If you're collecting excess data, you're failing privacy by design in that particular instance. Common example where you see a flaw, for instance, if you see a number of applications that we download from Play Store, correct? You see many of them are seeking unnecessary permissions, right? A food delivery app is asking permission for my drive, is asking to access my photograph. Why do they need it, right? So they it's like throwing a fishing hook and see how many people don't read it or just click I agree and see they get access to it, right? So that's the most dangerous part, when not actually waiting for the user to point out there is a flaw in the way you are protecting my data, rather being proactive to embed privacy in your product and services, right? So ideal privacy by design product or service would have checked it then and there. Why are we asking this permission? Do we really need this permission? Do we really need this access? If not, remove that. You should not be part of your design, right? So this is a classical example of your privacy by design. It goes into every level. How do you design a website? How are you collecting the consent, right? So I can give you a lot of examples in terms of how practically you achieve a privacy by design, right? There are 7 principles. With the limitation of time, I'm not be able to explain you all the 7 principles, but they're quite easy to conquer, right? Now, the next topic is international data transfer. So, international data transfer again is a very important topic because any law is very sensitive when the data goes out of their territory, right? And they have all the controls and limitation when the data is within their borders, right? But once the data goes out, their control sort of diminishes, almost becomes non-existent, right? And that's the reason every law will be very particular about what data is going out of the territory, right? So in that case, what you're seeing in the slide is a classical GDPR international data transfer instruments, right? Each of these instrument are sort of have a separate purpose, right? And for example, adequacy decision is what we call very similarly in the Indian law in terms of the countries which have been whitelisted, right? Whitelisted is the approved set of countries you can transfer the data. Adequacy is a similar mechanism where there is a recognition for certain countries by the European Union, especially the Commission is that entity which does that, European Commission. So they select certain countries and they recognize that they have a similar standard of protection compared to EU. So you can do a transfer of data without any documentation, right? So this is what we call it as adequacy decision. And in security safeguards, there are another 4 to 5 different instruments. Each of them are have their own set of applicability, and we discuss all these things in detail. And derogations are exemptions, right? So exemptions again exist in every part of any law that we will seek to discuss, right? Again, these exemptions have a lot of important thumb rule which you need to understand before we start utilizing them, right? These are something we will discuss during a session. So transfer impact assessment is very close to what we discussed earlier. Is regarding the international data transfer. So when you're going to do an international data transfer, now there is a demand to do a transfer impact assessment, because as I told you, once the data goes out of the continent, or sorry, goes out of the territory, it becomes a very big challenge for the regulators to sort of have monitor or sort of in terms of have a control over the data, right? So that's the reason, especially in the European Union, they come up with the transfer impact assessment. So in these 6 steps, we will try to assess the risk that is involved. How do we sort of take your compensating controls and try to mitigate the risk? And if you're not able to mitigate the risk, you need to sort of abort that particular transfer, right? The onus is maximum on the data controller to take the decision, because controllers are based out of European Union, right? The data has to go out of European Union. That is when you do a transfer impact assessment. So we're going to discuss that in detail. This is data privacy by design strategy. There are 2 sets of strategy, which is data oriented strategy and process oriented strategy. And this is a very interesting concept, because these are all strategies. How do we protect the data in an organization, right? So again, we will be walking through all these steps in our sessions. Very interesting strategy. I'll be giving a excellent material regarding this. How do you actually apply on the organization? So this we will be covering. Metric analysis, very important part of your sustain phase. In sustain phase, we will be doing audits and we will be measuring the organization in terms of are we able to reach what we have planned. And part of metric analysis is a method. How do we analyze the data that we collect, right? And there are different methods: trend analysis, return on investment, business resiliency, and program maturity. Especially program maturity is a very, very important concept, which is very close to the CMMI. Okay, so CMMI is what we generally use for giving the maturity rating for a process, right? So similarly, for a privacy program management, we have something called PMM, privacy maturity model. Again, a very important exam question, as well as a very important concept that you can use in your organization to assess the privacy program maturity, right? There are 5 different levels, and each level has a definite markers in terms of how do you assess them. Very important concept. Just showing you the different levels which are involved here. It's actually a framework which is developed by a Canadian institute. Okay. Data breach notification part, very, very important topic. So in GDPR, you have 72 hours, but there are some very critical decisions that has to be taken within that 72 hours, right? There are 2 important notification that is there. One is to notify, and one is to notify the data subject, right? These are very make or break decisions, right? The reason I say that is your entire organization reputation is at stake, right? And you need to take the right decision. And when I say this decision, if you take a wrong decision here, it can also drag you down in terms of number of lawsuits, or it could be landing you with a lot of penalties as well, right? So that decision is based on an impact assessment. You need to do that before 72 hours. There are some specified criteria, especially let's take an example of GDPR. It says whenever there is a risk to the rights and freedom of data subject, you need to inform the supervisory authority. If there is a high risk, then you have to sort of inform the data subject. So exam strategy, I'm giving you that these are the tips. So kindly focus on the study materials which will be provided. The textbook is very important, as well as our participants guide if you join my session, right? Book a exam slot. That's generally have worked wonders for many of my candidates. There's a CIPM body of knowledge, which is the syllabus. Use a Quizlet app, which is available for free. A lot of people have created it. Whoever has been studying for this exam, it really helps. These are the resources. Okay. IAPP official Q&A, which is available at IAPP site. There is one more practice test with Majid Hateman in Amazon. You can purchase that. There is 180 questions. I provide 90 question mock test. So whenever you're trying this mock test, put yourself into 90 question 2.5 hours time mode. This helps you a lot. Okay. And these are some of the exam strategy I generally cover part of my sessions, right? This is the exam blueprint. How many questions that comes from each of the chapter? There are actually not chapters, there are 10 chapters. These are 6 sections. Okay. Section 1 and 2 is the broad classification of governance. Section 3 to 6 is the data life cycle, which is assess, protect, sustain, and respond. These are the minimum and maximum questions that will come for each of these sections. So these are extrapolated into 10 chapters. Okay.